Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Crowdcast with Brent from Most Days. I'm Jennifer Marshall, co-founder and executive director of This Is My Brave, and I'm so glad you're here to learn about Most Days, what it's all about, and how it got started. And so let's dive right in, Brent. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about why you started Most Days?
Yeah, sure. Glad to be here. So I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a technologist, an entrepreneur. I'm in San Francisco, and I have I've this is my fourth company. So I've been involved in being a technology entrepreneur for the entirety of my career. But this business is very personal to me, and so. Um, Basically, I grew up in Colorado. I am the oldest of four, and we're all within 5 years, so we're all really close in age. And I had this very idyllic middle class upbringing. I was most likely to succeed in eighth grade, and I was the winter ball king, a bunch of lame suburban accolades. And um, and then life happened to me early in high school, and my parents got divorced, and they both were distracted by the divorce. They got their own. They both have moved out and split time in the house, but basically the parenting went away. They might disagree. They might disagree with that, but it created a situation in which there was a lot less supervision, and the home, we lived close to the high school, it turned into a congregation point for the lost kids. And so a lot of the kids in the neighborhood who had, for lack of a better term, broken homes or had parents who weren't around as much, and some pretty tragic circumstances, ended up spending all of their time um, in the home. And what happened was it just turned out really poorly. So for me personally, I rebelled in a very aggressive way. I ended up getting arrested a lot, and I was a really heavy pot smoker. I got kicked out of the public high school that I was going to in Boulder. I was sent to a boarding school in New Hampshire. I was kicked out of that school. I couldn't tell you if I graduated high school or not. And addiction really ripped through this group, and it ripped through and it impacted my family. So in this group and in my family, we've had benzo addiction, alcohol addiction, behavioral addictions, heroin addiction, opiate addiction. And I spent really from like the age of 15 to my mid 20s lost and just kind of dealing with coping coping with this change, and with and it wasn't so much some trauma around what had happened in my life. I just got way off track,
Mhm.
and I dealt with it in all of the wrong ways. And so I had a very dark 7 or 8 year period, and as did my family. But as with many of these cases, there's light at the end of the tunnel. And so one of the interesting things about being on the front lines of addiction in different ways for the majority of my adult life is addictions, at least the negative consequences of addiction, manifest themselves through repeating the same behavior over and over again, a behavior that's not good for you. It serves some purpose in self-medicating at some point,
Mhm.
but ultimately it'll destroy your life. It can kill you. And then the way out of addiction is not a pill. It's not a procedure. It is, you got to change your behavior. You got to stop doing the thing, and
Yeah.
you've got to start doing a different set of things.
Yeah.
Um, and so in addiction, there are the notions of one day at a time and progress,
Mhm.
not perfection. There are these frameworks for behavior change in addiction that for me were really helpful in, basically the way I would describe it is kind of scrubbing my hull of barnacles to sail
Mhm.
more smoothly. And when you look at medicine, this is actually very true. So in if we look at, okay, what leads to higher length of life and higher quality of life, 50% of health outcomes are attributed to behavior, and 15% are attributed to the 4 trillion a year that we spend on medical care.
That's
So what became so obvious to me is we're all suffering from something. Like, the data is really crazy. 97% of people are suffering from at least one health ailment, identify as suffering from at least one thing. So we've all got our thing that we're dealing with. And whether it's diabetes or depression or addiction, there's a set of things you can be doing most days to improve the quality or length of your life. And now, this is not to replace traditional medical care. There's, of course, a role for that. There's a role for therapy, psychotherapy. All of these things should exist. But the things we get up every day and do, they really matter to quality and length of life. And so what most days is we're productizing some of the behavior change frameworks we see in addiction. So in addiction, if you, if the kind of classic example, if you're just drinking too much, you want to stop drinking, and you walk into, for an example, an AA meeting, AA has proved fairly efficacious. So we can actually now study this, and it's got reasonable efficacy. None of this is a silver bullet, but there's a couple of key things that are happening in AA that are happening in addiction. And I'll use the example of AA. So you go to an AA meeting. So first and foremost, you're with a group of people who are all on the same journey. They all want the same thing.
Yep.
And two is there's a plan. You're committing to a plan, and there's accountability on the plan. So in AA, the plan comes in a couple of different forms, but there are the 12 steps, which is a very specific set of steps you work through over time. You're gonna get a sponsor, and so there's an accountability. And the sponsor is going to tell you things like, "I want you to check in with me depends on the sponsor, they're all different, but I want you to check in with me every day." Things like, "I want you to make your bed every morning, start the day with a win," whatever that's going to depend. So there's a set of things that you're trying to do every day, and then you're able to measure your progress over time. And so in AA,
right?
Chips, 24 hours a week, 40 years. I mean, there are people who've been going to AA for decades, and you get chips. And so what we're doing at most days is we are trying to productize this. So there is on most days, you are creating or subscribing to a routine, a set of things that you want to incorporate into your life. We have a library of routines that have been written by psychologists, neuroscientists for anxiety, depression, OCD, grief, loneliness. Is about a dozen different categories. Or you can create your own. So our members, it's about 50-50. So for me, I have a routine that has 40 things that I'm trying to do most days. I'm a little bit of a freak. But I've created my own. You are then holding yourself accountable, checking in. Did you complete the items or did you not complete the items? It's a social network. You're sharing those with a group of people who are either dealing with the same thing. So we have a community. We've got the Brave community on most days. So you can be attached to a community like the Brave community. You can be sharing it with people who are categorically in the same, also dealing with depression. You can have anybody you want follow you to support you. And then there are analytics to understand progress over time. So it's really us saying, hey, what we know and what we've learned about behavior. So behavior change really matters. We've learned a lot about it, and we can use the lens of addiction to understand what works and what doesn't work. Let's productize that, and let's make it available. No matter what you're suffering from, that you can find a set of things that are going to help you improve quality or length of life. And then two, let's put it on a platform that allows us to get better at helping people achieve that change. So the technology allows us to use gamification. It allows us to use the data set and AI and machine learning to get better at understanding what's working and help people change their behavior. So that's a long story, medium short on what most days is and why I've arrived at it.
Well, it's amazing. And we at This Is My Brave have been so honored to get to work with you and your team on a pilot group from our community. And now we've launched our community page so we can connect there. And we're so excited for you to show people, actually, take us through some kind of screen grabs of what it looks like when you go in. So right now it's only on iPhone, right?
Yeah, we're iOS only. So the business was I've been incubating and kind of germinating on the idea of the business for about 5 years. It's born out of a system that I built for myself that I was using just to figure out some of my own issues. I went through um, in my adult life. I'd kind of gotten off of. I had stopped smoking pot in my 20s, very heavy, and that was harder than I had expected. I feel like pot gets underrated a little bit in terms of its difficulty from an addictive perspective.
Mhm,
And then I was a stressed out Silicon Valley CEO, and I basically slipped into a benzo dependency. So I had a very high anxiety phase, and I was
mhm,
prescribed Klonopins. I'm almost 40. This is in my early 30s, and I found that I struggled to get off of them. And so I'll tell this story quickly, and then I'll go to the screen
mhm.
grabs.
And if anyone has questions, drop them in the ask a question box and we'll get to those too.
And what's interesting about benzos and about and this is very emblematic of what we're trying to solve at most days, was I was suffering from basically panic attacks, just a lot of stress and life stuff as we all go through. And the goal was, okay, take the Klonopins to help me sleep for some finite period of time.
Mhm,
And what happened is I started taking them, and then I would try to stop taking them, and I couldn't sleep without them.
mm,
And I went to the doctor and said, "Hey, what do I do?" And he's like, "Oh, just stop taking them." Basically, the advice was not good for my doctor.
mhm,
Maybe I need a new doctor. And so my car got broken into, and my backpack was stolen. It's a common thing in San Francisco. The car's getting broken into. And I thought, oh, this is a good chance. I'll just stop taking them. And I spent 2 weeks. I dropped 20 pounds. I wasn't eating. My anxiety was through the roof. It was a harrowing experience. Just
mhm,
quitting a benzodiazepine like that is really difficult.
mm,
And so what I did, because the doctor wasn't helpful, um, was I just started Googling. And there's a woman who's a pharmacologist in the UK in the mid 90s named Dr. Heather Ashton. She ran a benzo withdrawal clinic,
mhm,
and she created something called the Ashton Manual. Basically, what you do with benzos, if you want to get off of them, is you very slowly reduce, just a little bit at a time, whatever you're taking. So for me,
mhm,
it was Klonopin, it would be the brand name. And you actually introduce, so Valium has a shorter half-life. It's basically a less potent benzo. So what happens is the Klonopin goes down, the Valium you introduce, I wasn't taking Valium, comes up, the Valium goes off, and you should talk to your doctor if you're struggling with the
mhm,
same thing. Take it from me. And you drop off of the Klonopin, but you're on a higher dose of Valium, and then you come off of the Valium, and that worked.
mhm.
I don't take benzos, and I haven't for years. But what that meant was I needed to be very specific about what I was doing each day. Okay,
Okay.
here's the plan of coming off of the one and bringing up the other, and then bringing down the Valium.
Mhm,
And it turned into a spreadsheet of tracking 40
mhm.
different things. Am I exercising? Am I meditating? And incorporating everything that I knew about behavior change from addiction. But I think that story is emblematic here, which is, again, no matter what you're dealing with, there's a set of things you can do most days to
Mhm.
improve your life related to that thing. And you want to be very intentional about, okay, what are those things? What are those things that I'm doing? How do I kind of hold myself accountable each day?
Well, and
How do
Brent,
I
I think
understand progress?
the reason it works is that everybody's different, right? So you build in you might take from a written plan by a psychologist, but you're adding in what really works for you too. So there are those steps and you're going to customize your routine, and that's what's amazing about it.
Yeah, for everybody, it's going to be totally different. So let me walk through, and I'll share my screen just to give a sense of what it looks like.
Okay.
Can you
And
see that?
Yep, and I'm going to make that full screen. So go ahead.
Okay, so this is the main feed, and I'll walk through basically the 4 pillars. But the 4 pillars, as a reminder, you're creating or subscribing to a routine, and a routine is just a set of habits. It's a set of things you want to do most days. The key on most days, and this is, and we're borrowing this, and we're inspired by addiction. The foundation is self-compassion. And so in addiction, there's a progress over perfection, one day at a time. But in most days, it's, hey, you're trying to get to this set of things. If you do the things, great, feel good about it. If you don't, tomorrow is a new day. So as it relates to changing your behavior, dropping bad habits, incorporating good habits, being really kind, compassionate, and loving just within your own relationship with yourself is really, really important. These narratives that we all get into of beating ourselves up because we did do something or we didn't do something, those are actually very, very counterproductive. Real change happens just a little bit at a time over extended periods of time. So there are very few silver bullets. Changing behavior is very, very hard. Killing bad habits, adopting good habits is hard. So our goal is to measurably increase quality and length of life globally. We want to democratize access to the platform that we're building and make it available to anybody. Although yes, today we are only iOS only, but we will have Android out by the end of the year.
Yay.
From a value perspective, we're very mission driven. And so we are a social network, but we do not allow advertising. So the existing social networks, they have gotten themselves in trouble, frankly, by misaligning incentives. They are serving advertisers, and they exploit basically the users of their platform on behalf of a third party. We don't think that their intentions were bad in building those businesses. I'm not a like Mark Zuckerberg is evil type of person, but the misalignment of incentives is doing more harm than good. And so you really need to make sure that as a business, your incentives are aligned. And we want to always make sure that our incentives are aligned to help the people who are on the platform and to not ever exploit them on behalf of some third party. We do not charge for it today, but we will. A portion of our revenue will go straight back into nonprofits that are serving the areas that basically behavioral health areas. And then we're very focused on privacy and then democratizing access. Even though we will charge for most days at some point, there will always be, if you can't afford it, the ability to access it free of charge. So again, it's making a plan, surrounding yourself with support, and then monitoring progress. When you look at addiction, the secret sauce is in the group coming together and supporting one another, creating a space for people to be vulnerable and honest about whatever's happening. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is, but that tends to be where the secret sauce in terms of the changes. So again, you're creating or subscribing to routines. So on the left here, the leftmost screenshot, that's the library of routines. We're adding new routines every day, but as I had mentioned, we've got everything from anxiety to weight loss. And these are written by psychologists and neuroscientists, primarily from who are associated with schools here in California. So with Berkeley, UCLA, and Stanford. But to give you an example, Dr. Alex Korb wrote our routines for depression. He's written a best-selling book on managing your life if you have depression. He studies depression and the impact on the brain and things that you can do behaviorally, and how that can help alleviate the effects of depression. Or you're just creating your own, as I had mentioned. So actually, yeah, there's Dr. Korb. So we're very focused on kind of finding these people and helping them write the routines. What's interesting is these daily routine steps here, they look very simple. So get out of bed or get some sun. This would be specifically related to improving sleep if you're suffering from depression. But what's interesting when you talk to Dr. Korb and somebody who's studying images of the brain and the effect of different things, is what he would say is, prescription drugs like antidepressants, SSRIs, that they're kind of branded science. They've got a really good, they kind of feel really they feel like medicine and science, and which they are, but that and he would advocate both, exercising, et cetera, and in many cases SSRI. So you got to talk to a psychologist, a doctor, about what that looks like. But we're certainly not antidepressants, and nor would he be. But the point that he makes is, when you look at what's happening in the brain, something like exercising or getting sun, it actually looks very similar to what an SSRI is doing. It doesn't quite have the branding that the antidepressants does, but we want to think about these things almost as prescriptions. And so in many cases, ideally there's both, but again, that's for doctors and psychologists to determine. But it's interesting hearing him talk about it, what's actually happening in the brain. He would say something like exercise is actually much more nuanced. You're then each day checking in to hold yourself accountable. So you're either saying yes or not today. We've actually updated this. We heard from our feedback from our members that they wanted to mark not today instead of no. And then you're also marking 1 to 10, how are you feeling? So as a technologist, and I've got a lot of experience, and the team at Most Days does, in building and analyzing data sets, we want to have input and output. So input, what are the habits that you're doing? What are the things that you're doing most days? And then B, what's the output? How are you feeling? And we can take those and start to serve back to you, as we do in Most Days, and start to understand what's working, what's not working, both at an individual level and then at a group of people who are focusing on something level. So starting to understand efficacy of these behaviors on actually improving quality of life. Your yes responses are then shared with your feed and whoever's following you. And so we're trying to create positive reinforcement around the things that you're doing. Shame is such a toxic thing. So we're trying to engineer and take out of the product as we're trying to limit the chances that you run into shame. Shame's such a tough thing. And like, failure is a part of changing behavior. Like having days where you don't do the things, that's the nature of the beast. And so we want to celebrate the wins, but hey, the things you don't get to, it's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. But there's a whole bunch of neurochemical feedback loops that we see in social that we're trying to incorporate in. So one of the best definitions I've heard of good habits and bad habits is, good habits tend to, they don't have an immediate benefit, but they tend to have long-term benefit. And bad habits tend to have an immediate benefit and long-term consequence. So if I take that Xanax or I drink the beer or whatever, it's often actually in the moment, it will work well for me, but it has long-term consequence. And so one of the things that, one of the many reasons we think this has to be a social network is there are immediate neurochemical feedback loops when you have validation in social. And we want to tie those to good habits that don't intrinsically have those feedback loops. You then have the ability to monitor your progress over time. So what percentage are you completing the items? How is that changing over time? What's the relationship of your habits to your mood? Which habits are most correlated with, feeling good or not feeling good. And so kind of serving the data back. And then lastly, just very, very focused on privacy. So you can customize this. There's a single player mode where you've got, where if you've got a set of habits that you don't want to share for whatever reason, you can be totally private. Your routine doesn't have to show up in your profile, or you can share it. I think either way, we encourage people to share over time. That's where a lot of the tools that can actually help people successfully achieve that change are going to come on when you're vulnerable and you're opening up to accountability. It can be a very small group of people. But we think that's important over time. But there is some data to support that just accountability to self increases odds of creating change. But very, very focused on member privacy.
That's awesome. I'm going to close that video and bring us back. And what I love about Most Days is it's so simple. It's so user-friendly. And it's like, just you get into the routine of checking in, usually the evening, and then you see your progress. You feel good about your achievements over time, and it really does improve your life. So we're so excited to be working with you. And thank you, Brent, for sharing all that you did today. We didn't get any questions, but the replay will be available for everyone. And I guess let's tell them how they sign up, and if they want to become an active user on most days, where should they go?
Yeah, so you can find us in the App Store. If there's more information on mostdays.com, feel free to reach out directly. Like we're pretty responsive. So I'm Brent at mostdays.com. My recommendation is, and this can be, I'll make it a broader recommendation. It's not totally self-serving, because of course we're excited about anybody who wants to join us at most days, is, and this was true for the system that I built, and it's true on most days, is getting into the habit of holding yourself accountable. Not even necessarily doing the habits is the most important. And so what happens is, if you're going to do it on most days, or you're going to create your own doc or on a notepad or something, have a set of things that you'll know, hey, if I incorporate these into my life, I'm going to be happier. I'm going to be healthier if I'm doing most of these things most days. And so we have the routines. You can create this list yourself, and then commit to each day checking in. And as Jen said, it typically happens at the end of the day, and saying, hey, did I do these things or not? And it's okay if on most days you're marking everything not today. That's fine. You're reminding yourself of the set of things you want to get done for the next day. And you're going to make it a little bit more likely that you do a little bit more the next day. And so set the bar at the 30 seconds it takes to look at the list in the whenever works for you. But what we tend to see on most days is in the evening, and say, did I do the thing or did I not do the thing? And you'll find you start doing it a little bit more over time. You find these little moments during the day, say, ooh, I want to mark yes to this. Okay, I'm going to spend 10 seconds thinking about 3 things I'm grateful for, or whatever it might be. So set the bar really low. You want to focus on consistency over intensity. We talk about this with working out. If you want to start working out and you don't work out, just get out the door. If you walk around the block, count it. You just want to do it as much as you can, and you'll walk further over time. So that's my recommendation for how to get started. It's a journey without a destination. Consistency is the most important thing. Be kind to yourself. And then if you have a day where you don't check in, okay, tomorrow's fresh. Tomorrow's a new day. Yep.
Yeah, I love that. I put in the chat our link for our community on most days. So if you're a This Is My Brave alum, or you're connected to the organization, or you want to be connected to the organization over there, join us. We're checking in, we're supporting each other, we're sharing inspiration to keep going towards improving your habits to improve your life. So thanks so much, Brent. This has been great.
Oh, as always, thank you so much. Anything for the Brave community.
Awesome. Well, have a great rest of your day. I'll see you again soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.